It is Friday, September 1st. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back, everyone, to another salty episode of LTPS. It's been a very interesting week. There's no doubt about that. So let's begin, as always, with our PlayStation Plus reminder. This is your last call to claim the August games before they go away. September 5th, it's going to change over to Saints Row on PS4, PS5, Generation Zero on PS4, and Black Desert Traveler Edition on PS4 as well. Now, not really the strongest lineup, right? I think that's fair to say. It's certainly low on the totem pole when we look back the past year or so, and that's bound to happen. We're going to get bad months or unsavory months on PlayStation Plus, and there's always value to adding the games anyway. You never know. You might play them one night and like it more than you thought you would. But the real news here goes into our first news story, which is on the same PlayStation blog post confirming the new lineup. Sony also confirmed a PlayStation Plus price increase across all tiers globally starting September 6th. So, the new pricing is as follows. Essential is now going to be $79.99 USD, or €71.99 Euro, or £59.99 pounds sterling. Extra is going up to $134.99, or $125.99, or $99.99. Premium is going up to $159.99 USD, $151.99 Euro, or $119.99 GBP. So, for comparison's sake, here in the US, Essential is currently $60, Extra is $100, and Premium is $120, and so this represents a $20, $35, and $40 increase across the board. Sony says for current 12-month subscribers, the price increase will not occur until your next renewal date on or after November 6th. So, there is a small grace period of having the existing pricing roll over if you make no changes to your plan after September 6th. However, if you do make a change, like upgrades, downgrades, or buying additional time, then it will be the new pricing. The PlayStation blog says, and I quote here, "This price adjustment will enable us to continue bringing high-quality games and value-added benefits to your PlayStation Plus subscription service." So the really surprising thing here is not so much the prices going up, because that is going to happen at some point, right? It sucks, nobody likes it, but as we're seeing with most things around us, whether that's your livelihood with housing, groceries, utilities, or God forbid you want to have some kind of recreational fun, everything is costing more, so this was probably going to happen eventually, but it's more a matter of how much they're charging here. So I saw these numbers and I'm like, wow, that is really aggressive. Ideally you'd want to roll this out over a 2-3 year period and do $5 here, $10 here, and maybe that would be annoying, but at the very least it would lighten that burden on consumers. But it seems like for right now, this is what we have, even though in theory they could have a pricing roadmap and it's going to get more expensive. But either way, understandably, consumers are now looking at this new pricing and they're going, wow, that is a lot. So what are you adding to justify this price increase? And Sony did not say anything on the PlayStation blog outside of that quote, which many can read as them saying we're only increasing the price to maintain what we currently offer. I wouldn't read too much into that, given that there is a conflict of interest on if they're going to add things and they announce it and they have all this time in between when the price is going to affect. That will incentivize people to pre-buy a bunch of years for whatever tier they want, and that way they're getting access to all the new perks with a lower price. Not saying that is what's going to happen, but they would probably ideally handle this like they did last summer with the PS Plus relaunch, where they were cutting off 1-year PS Now memberships because those were going to get grandfathered into premium at effectively half off, right? They would probably do the same thing here, although I'm not saying that is what's happening. Although we do know anyway that Premium is going to get PlayStation 5 game streaming. That is a new perk that is coming, and that is a costly endeavor with the amount of R&D that's gone into it, with how long they've been working on these new specialized PS5 server blades, and also bringing online a lot more data centers, more than they have with PS3 and PS4. So that is a new perk, and I'm certain they are pricing all that into this new these new price points that they outlined, right? I'm sure a lot of that is already getting baked in to what they had spent getting there. Because you can see with Premium, that's a $40 increase. And even though functionally these brand new server blades might be a lot better than what we have with PS3 and PS4, out of all the perks that they could add to Premium, I don't think that's the one where people are going to be beating down the door to pay that much more to get access to Premium, right? So there's that. As for Extra and Essential, I mean, really, it's a gut punch for Essential, right? Because that's the base tier, and that is the tier that people need to play games online. This has been a thing since PlayStation 4, and even though, like, on paper, it always pencils out with the monthly games and the value that you're getting, right? It always works out to where you are getting value, but millions of people just simply do not care or even claim the monthly games because they might be more casual customers. Maybe they only buy 2-3 big blockbuster games a year, and if they want to play those games online, if they're not free to play titles, then they have to spend $60 more just to play online. They're never getting rid of that mandate. So it's not like we're going to theorize or humor the idea that that's actually going to happen unless they have some kind of exit plan to retain the amount of subscribers that they do have. But the point is, there's that, and they've always paywalled cloud saves as well, which is really annoying behind the base tier. But there's also the other angle of, for really engaged and dedicated PlayStation customers that have been subscribed for years, that's also this growing carrot on a stick scenario, right? It feels like Sony can get away with this because they know people either need it for online play, or they know that people have been claiming PS Plus monthly games for years, and they've built up a multi-hundred library of games that they will lose at a moment's notice if they're not paying for PS Plus anymore. But the second you do pay, then you can play those games again. So it very much feels like we can charge this because we can, and that's the other part of it too, right? Because Sony no longer reports PlayStation Plus numbers on that last fiscal report, and so between that and also maybe the expectation that they will lose some subscribers. And there's also Microsoft, where they recently realigned Xbox Live into Xbox Game Pass, like a core membership, right? Which is going to obfuscate their numbers a little bit. And considering that's a close competitor, that might also be a little bit weird with them announcing numbers that appear higher, even though Game Pass has traditionally been in that 25 million something range, right? So that complicates matters. But anyway, we're kind of getting into the weeds here. There's a number of reasons, and this one included, that now paints a picture of why they're not going to report PlayStation Plus numbers. There's a saturation point, the competition, and now this, which they might see a drop-off. And I'm not even going to say it's a lot, because I think they would not do this pricing unless they felt pretty good about how people are probably still going to stay subscribed. We'll see. But with most other sectors, like we mentioned earlier, and the price increase happening for all these different industries and goods and services, people are paying them because they kind of have to, even the recreational stuff. So Sony might be in a position where they feel they can get away with this. They've also been pretty good with backing down or reversing course when they feel they've done something wrong during the PS5 cycle, but I would not expect that is going to happen in this circumstance. Now that's a good segue into our next news story, which is Giant Bomb's Jeff Grubb, where recently he retweeted the news about the PS Plus price increase, saying that he's heard a state of play is coming and that the price increase feels like a lead-in for that. A lead-in, if that does mean there's some kind of new perk coming for PS Plus Essential, Extra, maybe making sure that the PS5 game streaming goes live with that new firmware update, which should be going live very soon, and perhaps that will launch immediately, and therefore it coincides with that September 6th deadline for the price increase going into effect. But either way, this goes immediately back to last week's LTPS. That I just said that we're probably getting something soon. Likely not a state of play, likely not a showcase, given that there's been really nothing steering us in that direction of a big long-form showcase. it does seem like a very safe bet that they will hold at least a state of play or do some PlayStation blog posts. We're right next to TGS. We've got things like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which the pre-orders just went live for just the base copies of that game on across multiple retailers. So it seems like something's going on. Perhaps we'll get a state of play that showcases that game, a handful of other titles. Maybe there are new PS Plus perks, but I imagine we're going to get the rigmarole of all the sort of pre-order bonuses and separate editions you can buy for Rebirth. So it does seem like something is coming very soon. Perhaps that will also imply some PS Plus news that lightens the blow here for the price increase. But, for now, we'll have to wait and see. Now, moving on to more PlayStation Plus news, this one being very timely given what we just talked about, but GamesIndustry.biz is reporting from the stockbroking firm Goodbody that publishers like Devolver and TinyBuild have been hit pretty hard by smaller subscription deals from Sony and Microsoft. So both of these publishers have seen a dramatic drop in their share price, and that's in large part due to the platform holders not paying as much for these games on subscription. Now, it's not just that. There's also been delays Devolver announced, or TinyBuild's recent release of Hello Neighbor 2 underperforming, but it's still interesting to hear, with TinyBuild considering moving back to full-priced premium games and Devolver having turned down some subscription deals recently. But Patrick O'Donnell of Goodbody made a really good point here. With the share price being so low on these two publishers, they could be acquisition targets. So NetEase has a stake in both, and then Sony and Devolver, which that could be an interesting scenario. Not saying it's going to happen, but if it's a kind of a stars aligned scenario where Sony wants to do the deal and Devolver is willing to sell at a good share price because they are public, so it's a different process. But out of all the sort of multi-platform, developers and publishers, I feel like Devolver actually would be a suitable fit for Sony. But that really still depends on what they would do after the acquisition closes, because we have still not seen what Sony would do in that circumstance. There's always been this ongoing rhetoric of, if Sony bought multi-platform studio X, Y, and Z, they'd make them exclusive, but we don't really know that. This reputation seems to come from the very backbone of what Sony's been doing with these long-standing PlayStation partners, where they eventually acquire them. They've only been making PlayStation IP for 10-something years, and then they more or less tie the knot on them. And remember, all platform holders do the occasional third-party game in perpetuity, right? So yeah, there's a matter of FF16 or 7 Remake or Street Fighter, but again, they all occasionally do that. It's always one of those things where per generation you can count those games on one hand typically. So we're getting off the rails here. The point is, Bungie was the outlier, and that was still something where it was conditional on Bungie to keep publishing on all platforms, and that's still in Sony's best interest when they want more of a mutual back and forth with Bungie, perhaps using the Sony Group's expertise and adapting the IP into mediums like TV and film. They also want to get their live service experience, obviously. So I feel like Devolver, with those premium small-scale games that they tend to publish and partner up with, I mean, that kind of stuff would be really fascinating, and I think Sony has really put a spotlight, and they try to partner with a lot of those games on an individual basis, but that is why I feel like Devolver would be a good fit, but we don't know how they would approach handling the ownership of them, if they would do a lot of exclusivity, maybe launch them into PS Plus Extra or this and that. But the other angle of the story is PlayStation Plus. So between Sony and Microsoft, they are tightening up their purse strings on these big deals for getting these games on subscription. And this was, I think, bound to happen. It's not necessarily a bubble bursting thing, but I think for the platform holders and certainly for a lot of developers, they have to find this middle ground of what works financially for both parties, especially with Microsoft really ramping up and doing aggressive deals for Game Pass, right? So they're willing to write pretty big checks. Not so much, I would assume Sony is not necessarily doing that to the same degree, but Sony, of course, is a lot more conservative in this area, so it would stand to reason that they're not cutting checks nearly as large as Microsoft, and now we see that they're increasing pricing. But either way, it was a matter of finding a balance. Subscription is still a very fascinating model that has to find its place. Games just are experienced in a much different way compared to TV, film, music, and things like that. So I think this was an eventuality, but it's not necessarily bad news, but I think both parties have to figure out what fiscally makes the most sense for both. Next up, let me acknowledge a news story that came from me, oddly enough, which this goes back to our recent Tuesday video about PlayStation Plus Premium and the Classic Games program that Sony's doing, and the hurdles that Sony has with third-party publishers and their ownership of the IP and all that. And I mentioned briefly that for the PS2 emulator, I had heard on good authority that it very much is coming, but and that was something where I didn't really intend that to sound like a big scoop or a leak or anything like that. I think most of you know at this point, for as long as I've been doing this show, that's not necessarily what I try to do on the channel. And look, I mean, I've been privy to some things going on in the PlayStation business, but I don't really seek it out. And moreover, I kind of decided a long time ago that I wasn't really going to try and be a sort of Jeff Grubb or Tom Henderson, where the primary sort of view driver for the channel is that I may have a big leak or something like that. So, because the channel also just doesn't need it. We've been coasting along just fine. And so LTPS, over the 10-something years I've been doing this, has been primarily news aggregation, and I would also hope you watching to hear some insightful comments on the industry and somebody that knows this company very well. Having said that, I did mention that in the video that I had heard it definitely is coming, but that felt very safe to say, given that I feel like most would probably come to that conclusion that they are working on one, given every sort of variable at play here, which is they've got a new PS1 and PSP emulator with these new features. We haven't seen a new PS2 game in a while. They have this new refreshed Classics program. They've been going back and adding trophies to the games they did publish. It would stand to reason that we are eventually going to see PlayStation 2 games come back on PS4, PS5, and that it's going to be a new emulator that will do it. So it's not that wasn't really intended to be a big breakout news story for me, and do not expect that often, because again, we're not really looking to do that. Even if I may know what's going on in the PlayStation business, that will likely not happen often. Let's just put it that way. Moving on to the PlayStation Portal, the new PSP. For some reason, they did not announce all this with the coverage that came out very recently, but now we finally have a confirmed release date, November 15th, and also the pre-orders are live on PlayStation Direct. One per customer, still in stock the last time I checked. I think it will probably stay in stock, but hey, you never know, maybe it will do well. It also depends on how many of these things Sony is going to make, but if you are interested, then it is finally live on PlayStation Direct for $199. Now let's get into some juicy, delicious sales data, and we've got something here that's been a long time coming, and that's PS5 finally catching up to PS4's rate of sale, at least here in the US. So this is coming from a new report from Circana, which tracks video game sales data in the US. PS5 is now officially selling 5% above PS4 and 87% above PS3 on a launch-aligned basis comparing lifetime sales. So it took nearly 3 years, but after all these supply constraints, and PS4 at the time was doing very well, so PS5 finally caught up and doing a little bit better than PS4, and this might be the case slowly but surely for more territories in the coming weeks and months. Now, some other interesting data points is that video game hardware spending is primarily from low and high income households, as in income of less than $50,000 contribute about 30% over the last 2 years, and incomes over $100,000 contribute 40%. So interestingly, incomes between 50 and 75 to 75 and 100, those are in the 10 to 25% neighborhood. Also, we saw that Blockbuster premium games sold digitally is growing, and it's also the biggest contributor to game sales growth overall, because one area that is flattening is subscription. So it did do well in 2020 and 2021, but after reaching $400 million in November 2021, it's largely stayed around that number every month. So again, kind of going back to the reoccurring theme of this LTPS, which is PlayStation Plus, the stagnating growth, the saturation, the sort of long-term viability of subscription in the games industry. It has a place, but that place is, at least for the time being, not the be-all, end-all delivery mechanism for video games, and premium does seem to sustain quite well still in this medium. Moving on to our next news story, SIE has filed a trademark for Astrobot recently in Europe, which is, I guess, a little interesting, if not perhaps a bit bizarre that they did not have these trademarks prior. Now, they do have trademarks for Astrobot, I believe, as separate standalone releases, but this is for the word and also the figurative manner. So it doesn't necessarily mean a new Astrobot game is on the way, but what it does mean is that Sony, like any other big business, is filing trademarks on a pretty regular basis. Either way, I think it would be safe to say that I would love to see more Astrobot, and I think I'm not alone in saying that. So I'm still very excited to see what Team Asobi is up to. If it is another Astrobot, I am all for that. Let's get into some Spider-Man 2 news. We're getting closer and closer to the game finally coming out, and today the PS5 bundle, controller, and console covers are officially out. Console covers still completely sold out, although you might have a chance with some retailers having availability locally or something. As of right now, it's still too late for me to check, but sometimes that does happen, so good luck if you're trying to grab one and not spending scalper prices. But we did also find out that the minimum size for the game is 98 gigabytes, so it is going to be quite large, as we're seeing with more and more PlayStation 5 games. Really, current gen games are in that 80 to 90 neighborhood on a regular basis. And we also saw, interestingly enough, that speaking with IGN, Sam Lake from Remedy did confirm that Alan Wake 2 was delayed a few weeks to avoid Spider-Man 2, because that game was moved out to the later half of October to avoid, being right next to Spider-Man 2, which was probably a safe call there, or a good call, because, the game is going to move millions and millions and millions. It's going to do very well, and you don't really want to be right next to Spider-Man in that with that release schedule. Moving on to some PlayStation VR2 news stories. There's still plenty of things going on for this headset on a very regular basis. Still seeing comments every so often about PSVR2 and the disappointment and this and that, and I know I have to get around to doing a formal review of the headset, but there's still always things going on for it, and new games often coming out. So let's cover up some news for PSVR 2. Now, last week we did see that Firewall Ultra came out, and so far the reviews for that have been not great. So apparently there's a fair amount of bugs. It's got a weird UI in it, and there's a really long matchmaking process. Have not jumped in myself just yet, but that game was kind of a long time coming for PSVR 2 and a PSVR 2 exclusive, so disappointing to see that it maybe isn't faring all that well, but again, I would like to check that game out for myself. Now, No Man's Sky recently got the Echoes update, and that also included foveated rendering for PSVR 2, and from what I'm reading, it seems like the image quality has seen a massive improvement, because as foveated rendering works, it only applies to what you're looking at directly head-on, and your peripheral will have some of the detail drop down a notch, and so it's leveraging the budget of the hardware to give you the best possible image for the things that you're actually looking at. So that might be a good reason to jump into No Man's Sky. As for developer Polyarc, the developer of the Moss series, they recently announced a new spin-off multiplayer title in the Moss universe called Glassbreakers Champions of Moss. It's a 1v1 real-time battler where you pick 3 fighters and battle them against another player, and as of right now it's in early access for the MetaQuest 2, but a PSVR 2 version is on the way. This isn't exactly what I was hoping to see out of Polyarc, because ideally I would just like Moss Book 3, but at least they're expanding the Moss universe. Give me more of those mice, I am all for it. Then we saw the announcement of Paper Beast Enhanced Edition, so that's for PS5 and also PSVR 2, and if you're a PS4 owner, there will be an upgrade path for a small fee. So good to see another enhanced PSVR 2 game that will be available, and if you missed it or if you claimed it during the Play at Home program, then I would hope that that is going to be eligible and you could play it that way as well. Now, with all that said, it is time for an update on Let's Talk Plus, and I have no update for you. I apologize. I was really busy this week. I did not at all consider what we should do, just kind of a routine thing, and by the time I started filming this, I'm like, oh, what am I doing for that? So I apologize. It probably will be Linktree or something. I have to figure out which one is for sure going to be a safe link that we can reliably use, and that way we can keep doing the giveaways, because I don't want them to end, obviously. I will keep trying to help pay for your games. Those are all the news stories from this past week that I wanted to talk about with you all, and our Tuesday video was looking at the Classic Games program on PS4, PS5, and the problems that Sony is having with probably getting more games on the service in a reliable fashion. It's been a topic that's been kind of rattling around in my head for a bit, so go check that out. And then, as always, another video on Tuesday. But until then, that is it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Panecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.